If I had $1 for every single time somebody has told me or I've read, well, thank God for Penn State wrestling this season over the last 3 months, or at least the last 5 weeks, the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel will be very well funded. And here we are to talk about Penn State wrestling. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Greg Pickle with us here, wrestling reporter on the channel to discuss the Nittany Lions, and they're giving you what you want. That sweet, sweet feeling of utter domination. 45-0 blowout of Oklahoma at the Bryce Jordan Center. Greg, we're going to get into a recap of that, and then, of course, the Army Black Knight Invitational coming up this Sunday. So that's kind of where we're going on the show today. But just overall, your top thoughts about Penn State so far to start the season.
Yeah, off and running with the 2025-2026 Penn State wrestling season. Glad it's here, T. Frank, because we spent a lot of time over the summer, with good reason, talking about the success that Penn State had on the freestyle scene internationally, some domestically, but also some recruiting wins along the way. But now we're into the nitty-gritty of another Penn State wrestling season. The dual meets are underway. A lot of good stuff going on across college wrestling. I guess I'll stop right there just to note real quick that one thing we're bringing to Blue White Illustrated this season is a more bigger picture look at the sport. So check that out every Thursday and or Friday. It'll be Friday this week to give you an idea of what Penn State opponents, top-ranked guys around the country are doing. National duels were last weekend. Penn State was not there, obviously, because they were wrestling Oklahoma. We talked about that a bit last week. But plenty going on around the sport, T. Frank, and a lot of it is good news and positive vibes for Penn State.
Yeah, and of course, if you're watching this on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, you're watching it on Friday, a day after we normally post it. There's just a lot of stuff going on this week with Penn State football, and we're trying to shuffle some things around. That's going to, I want to say it's coming to an end because it's actually going to get crazier once the season is over, but we'll be back to our normal Thursday after the holidays. Of course, no show next week for Thanksgiving. Hope you early happy Thanksgiving to everyone who watches the show. And want to thank you for supporting us as we go through the offseason, as we try to build this show for you and give you what you want, which is a lot more Penn State wrestling coverage. And, of course, Greg does a great job over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. He was watching, following along, giving you the updates of Penn State, Oklahoma. So let's recap that. Let's dive in and talk about how that went. What were your biggest takeaways from the dual meet last weekend?
Yeah, so Penn State takes on Oklahoma, a Sooners team without some of its starters, and even still, Penn State did not have some of its starters, at least one, Josh Barr, the top-ranked 197-pounder in the country, returning All-American. And in his place, Connor Mirasola kicks off the dual meet, no less. 197 is usually wrestled at the end, of course, most nights. He doesn't matter. He leads off, beats DJ Parker, who was then number 8 in the Intermat rankings, 13-3. A really impressive performance from him, T. Frank, to start what was a really good duel for Penn State. And I think the other two things to highlight coming out of that is, number one, Penn State is as deep as anyone in the country when you talk about 197 with Josh Barr and Connor Mirasola. Let's move down then to 157. We thought PJ Duke could make his Penn State debut, the phenom freshman from New York, world champ at the U20 and a multi-time age group medalist on the freestyle scene. Instead, Penn State went to another decorated former high school recruit, not as much as PJ Duke, but few are, in Joe Seeley, a redshirt freshman, who made his debut in a dual match for Penn State, and dual meet for Penn State, rather, and tech fault Oklahoma's Landon Sommer 19-4 in 5:47. So that was one of the spots in the lineup that Oklahoma was without a starter, and Joe Seeley, of course, stepped in there in a weight class that was previously occupied by an All-American in Tyler Kasak and scored a technical fault victory. So you talk about how deep Penn State is at 197, and then obviously you talk about how deep they are at 157. It's truly impressive, and that's kind of the case almost up and down the lineup. So we'll get into some more of that stuff in the conversation about the Army Black Knight Invite, which is an annual stop for Penn State on its non-conference schedule a little bit later in the show. But yeah, a good opening night for Penn State. Survived the scare. I didn't put this in the rundown, but I will note it that Levi Haynes was collided with Oklahoma wrestler. I want to make sure I get his name right here, so I'm going to go to my notes. Carter Sherbert, early in that match, had to go into concussion protocol, cleared it pretty quickly. early with trainer Dan Monthly in the back of the Bryce Jordan Center. And then all he does, T. Frank, is build a 7-0 lead and then pin Carter Sherbert at the 4:15 mark of that match. So that was good news for Penn State because that is not necessarily a weight they're super deep at. They could figure it out, obviously. But and certainly, most importantly, you don't want anyone to have a concussion or a head injury. So it was good news that Levi Haynes was okay. And Penn State, cruised to victory pretty much across this match. It was their 72nd in a row win.
Yeah, I'm glad you included that there as notable to talk about that streak. A couple other guys I wanted to ask you about that are, that Penn State fans got to see for the first time in a Nittany Lion uniform. Let's start with Cole Mirasola at heavyweight. What did you think of him in his debut?
Yeah, right after his brother won, Cole Mirasola stepped out for Penn State at heavyweight, beat number 24 Juan Mora of Oklahoma 5-2. Thought he wrestled a really nice match for a guy who, again, is making his Penn State debut. We'll get into it more a little bit later in the show, but obviously a big weekend coming up for the long-term outlook at that spot. Cole Mirasola earned the right to start against Oklahoma by what he did in the room wrestle-offs leading up to this season, and he came out and got a victory. Lucas Cochran, the veteran Penn State wrestler who bumped up from 197 to wrestle full-time at heavyweight in his final season at Penn State, went down to the Shorty Hitchcock Memorial in Millersville last Sunday and won the big heavyweight title there. Not an overly stacked field, of course, but still put some good things on tape and obviously walked out of there with a title and a undefeated record. So fun to watch those guys. But yeah, he was good. And then the other debut we should probably hit on, since we hit on Connor and Cole, is Marcus Blaze, who Tech Falls Tyson Kermally 18-3 and 5-13. I wish there was more to say, but it's just Marcus Blaze. You've seen him throughout his career to date up until getting to the college level manhandle most of his opponents, and that's exactly what he did in his debut for Penn State at 133 pounds. So, like I said, good match for Penn State. Obviously, things to work on, I'm sure they feel like, in that room. That's always how it is in November. I think the thing that amazed me most, T. Frank, was that I realized these guys are all competitors, and they're used to flipping between freestyle wrestling, which is what they do in the offseason, and folk style, which is what they do during the college season. But most of these guys, only a few exceptions, Shane Van Ness one, Aaron DeGow another one, but most of these guys were wrestling freestyle for a majority of the offseason. And some of them just got back from the U23 championships like roughly a month ago. That's where Josh Barr got hurt at 100, the 197-pound start for Penn State, which is why Connor Mirasola was in. You won't know. You wouldn't know these guys basically wrestled a whole other season after winning the either high school championship, if they were a recruit, before starting their freshman year at Penn State, or helping Penn State win a national title last season in Philadelphia. So that was maybe the more impressive thing, too. No drop off, no letdown, no signs of fatigue for these Penn State guys. And you wouldn't expect that to be the case. But also, I think it's one of those things that probably isn't getting enough attention. Cale Sanderson, as you heard on Tuesday, Monday, I don't know. All the days run together at this point. But when you're over there at his news conference this week, which you can watch here if you're listening or watching on the BWI YouTube channel, he talked about that they came right in, most of these guys, right from freestyle to folk style with not a whole lot of time to flip the switch. But as Penn State wrestling tends to do, they flipped it and flipped it very well.
Yeah, and it was a really impressive, obviously, shutout victory in the win. I want to ask you about Luke Lildahl, goes to number 1 overall, but beyond just that of the rankings update, him and Marcus Blaze, and I don't want to put too much on Marcus Blaze here to start, but obviously he's doing that himself with how well he's his whole profile in general. A couple years ago, you might have said there aren't really any weaknesses in Penn State's lineup. But if there were areas where you said going into NCAAs or going into tournaments, like we'll see what happens at 125 or 133 or 141, it feels like Penn State has addressed that, with some of the guys they've recruited, they got in those spots. Now, I guess, how do you feel about those young guys that are on the roster in wrestling now? Do you feel like that's, on the path to being a strength of the team, where before it might have been, your Aaron Brooks and your Carter Starachis in the middle or upper weights?
Yeah, no, it's a very fair point, starting with Luke Lillidahl at 125, obviously a returning All-American who acquitted himself very well at the national tournament a year ago. He's back in the 125-pound starting spot for Penn State, of course, won his opening match of the season by major decision 14-4. He ascends to number one unanimously across the various ranking services that are out there, Intermat, Flow, the Open Mat. Not so much because of his win, but because of what happened at national duels. So Vincent Robinson of NC State lost a match there, so he dropped from number one to number two. There was a lot of other movement based on results there, like Dean Peterson of Iowa's up to number 7 from number 10, partially because Troy Spratley of Oklahoma State is down to number 8 from number 2. He's 3-2 now on the season. So Luke Lillidahl, a guy who was in that number 1 conversation in this weight class anyway, moves up there. We'll see. Vincent Robinson may overtake him at some point. Time will tell. Long ways to go. But now you make a fair point that, there's been years, and obviously Roman Bravo Young handled 133 for a long time. Bo Bartlett handled 141 for a long time. 25's been a bit of a question mark dating back to Nico Megaludis. But to your point, the hammers in the Penn State starting lineup have long been 57 and up, and in a lot of years, maybe 165 and up. And now Penn State definitely has, and it's terrible news for its opponents, obviously, but a very well-balanced lineup from 125 to 285, which I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but when Cale Sanderson talked at Media Day for Penn State Wrestling this time 2 weeks ago, he talked about the fact that they weren't going to national duels, but if one day, they had to go to a national duels NCAA championship, if that was ever put into place, they'd be okay because they tend to do pretty well in dual meets too, as evidenced by their 72 consecutive winning streak that they're on right now. So, there's years for sure that maybe they weren't as balanced and would have needed bonus point wins in more weight classes to win most matches, and maybe they'll get into that situation once the Big Ten season rolls around. But right now, they're balanced from top to bottom. You mentioned Marcus Blaze, tremendous wrestler at 133. He's 14th right now in Intermat rankings. Intermat, though, as we all know, does not typically rank freshmen before they actually start wrestling, which Marcus Blaze just made his debut last week. So I would expect him to continue to climb the rankings. And yeah, I mean, this is a lineup. You have Aaron Nagao at 141, an All-American who missed all of last season wrestling, in place of obviously a graduated All-American in Bo Bartlett, but also you had an All-American in Braden Davis who also bumped up to 141, who is redshirting this year. So talk about the depth. It's really top to bottom in this lineup.
Yeah, and it's really impressive to see the balance of it, because it does feel like the situation you mentioned, the resiliency for Penn State, not that they ever really... It's always hard to talk about this, right? Their dominance has been so thorough that it's hard to say, like, oh, well, there was a vulnerability at any point. But at the same time, like, you feel like this might be one of the more balanced lineups like you talked about. Just quickly want to remind everybody, if you're enjoying Penn State wrestling content and you're a Penn State fan in general, subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Like this video. Help us get the wrestling show up and going. We love the support. We love people watching the channel and having this conversation with you once a week. And, of course, if you are a Penn State fan in general, there's a lot of stuff going on over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Great time to remind you. The coaching search is ongoing. Like, even if you're watching this a week late, it's still going to be going on. So join us right now for just $1 for 7 days of access. Of course, over there, it's the Lion's Den message board and the wrestling room. All those things you can get over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So, Cale Sanderson spoke on Tuesday. Another thing you can, as Greg mentioned, you can watch here on the YouTube channel. What were your big takeaways from his conversation with the media?
Yeah, pretty good stuff. I encourage everyone, if you haven't watched it, to go check it out. You can also find the link and more conversation about Penn State wrestling over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, both in the Lions Den forum and in the wrestling room forum. Results, notes.
I'll put the link in the video as well,
Perfect.
so people can see it.
Yeah, so definitely join us over there. Yeah, a lot of good stuff from Cale Sanderson this week. T. Frank, obviously, a lot of people are wondering if Ono was going to make his debut for Penn State at the Army Black Knight Invite. He is not going to do that. He is preparing for an event in December. The Emperor's Cup back in Japan that he has to compete in to help along the qualifying process to make Japan's national team, which of course he's expected to do, but you still got to compete in the events, much like the U.S. Open and Final X here in the United States. So, if he is going to, maybe take some matches at some point this year, it doesn't look like he will, but if he is, it's not going to happen until the second semester. So I don't think, that question will keep coming up, and I think it's going to have a similar answer both in the weeks ahead and in the months ahead. So he touched on Josh Barr. We talked about him being injured previously, hurt himself a rib injury at U23s. Cale Sanderson said he's close to being ready to come back, but not ready yet. So he will not participate at the Army Black Knight. I'm sure they're hoping that he's ready for Drexel and Lehigh in early December following the Thanksgiving break, but time will tell. They're not going to rush him back. When you have Connor Mirasola, they wouldn't rush him back anyway, but when you have Connor Mirasola, T. Frank, you don't need to rush somebody back, especially from a rib injury. It's just a weird injury to get back from. And it's obviously pretty painful, as you've heard Cale Sanderson discuss, and I'm sure Josh Barr would discuss given the opportunity. So, yeah, that was a big takeaway. And then, to hit on some of the stuff we talked about at the start of the show, you're going to see Penn State take 20 guys up to the Army Black Knight Invitational. Not a great a huge field, I'm not sure the right way to phrase that, but it's not exactly a field loaded with other ranked wrestlers. So I would expect Penn State to probably make a lot of, they'll definitely have at least a guy in every final, I would expect. And I think you'll see a lot of Penn State versus Penn State guys in the finals. That's what we saw last year. And it was kind of iffy whether Penn State wrestled those, didn't wrestle those, just kind of depended on where things were at that weight class. And so one thing I'll say is that if Joe Seeley and P.J. Duke, assuming P.J. Duke makes his debut at 157 for Penn State as expected, if those two guys meet in the 157-pound finals, I'd be shocked if they didn't wrestle. And 285, we've talked about Lucas Cochran and Cole Mirasola. I'd be shocked if those guys didn't wrestle if they made the finals. And for both of those weight classes, I'd also be pretty surprised if Penn State guys just didn't make the finals outright. So those are the weight classes that are going to be in focus this weekend, T. Frank. And then obviously from there, we will see some ranked matches. Army has some guys who are ranked. Columbia has some guys who are ranked, none of which very close to Penn State guys. More so at heavyweight. Like, there are some decent heavyweights at this event that make that bracket probably the one most interesting to follow. So it'll be a good weekend for Penn State. We'll be watching to see if the 20 guys we expect to go, which is the 10 starters, and that's Connor Mirasola in for Josh Barr, obviously, and then the 10 top backups all make the trip. Looks like 197 is going to be the only weight. Obviously, with Barr injured, it'll just be Connor Mirasola. That's what it looks like. It'll be the case right now. Penn State may put a third guy in somewhere else if the bracket allows for it. But 19, 20 guys going to the Army Black Knight, 9 a.m. Sunday on Flow. We will be following that as closely as we can throughout the day. Usually the finals are about 4. It's one of the more impressive. I guess this shouldn't shock you because it's a Army, it's at Army. It's a military operation, but it's very precise. It's very efficient. Like, not a lot of wasted time. So this thing, usually the finals are somewhere between 3:45 Eastern time and 4 o'clock. They usually start. And depending on how many don't end up getting wrestled, it may end up, 4:30, 4:45, your final results will be in. So we'll have that all covered at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Should be a good weekend for Penn State.
All right. And he just got all the stuff. Like, I don't know that I need to say anything else. Any final thoughts about what your, I guess the next couple of days before we talk again over the Thanksgiving break? Anything else you want to add before we get going?
No, there'll be some action at other schools over the Thanksgiving break. Penn State will give its guys a few days off, as it usually does, and then they'll get back rolling for, obviously, getting ready for Drexel and Lehigh in early December. Kind of hard to believe that we're almost at December. It's kind of hard for me to believe. But, whether you want to follow the Penn State football coaching search or if you just want to stay up to date on Penn State wrestling, we'll have it for you here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel for sure. T. Franken at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
I'm Thomas Frank Carr. He's Greg Pickle. We'll be back after Thanksgiving for another conversation about Penn State wrestling. Until then, check us out. We'll talk to you then.